Snow was falling in thick, slow flakes that blurred the highway signs as Claire Anderson drove north toward Vermont. Her hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, as if holding back everything she didn't want to remember. The radio played faint Christmas songs that felt like ghosts humming through the static. 20 years since she'd last taken this road, 20 years since she'd called Maple Hollow home. The closer she got, the more her chest tightened. The town name appeared on a wooden sign dusted with frost, and something inside her whispered, "Turn back." But she didn't. A contract was a contract, and this one meant decorating the town's Christmas plaza, the same plaza where she once sold hot cocoa with her brother Eli. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent decades lighting up other people's holidays, while her own heart stayed dim. Her car heater hummed, but her fingers still felt cold. Every mile brought flashes, her father on the ladder, stringing blue lights along the roof, her mother's laughter spilling out of the kitchen window, Eli waving from the yard, snowflakes in his hair. Memory was cruel in its precision. It brought back the warmth and the loss in the same breath. When she reached the first houses of Maple Hollow, they looked smaller than she remembered, almost shy under the weight of the snow. Christmas lights glowed in reds and golds, cheerful and loud, but none were blue. The absence stung. Blue had always been their color, her father's favorite, the color of calm, of winter sky, of everything that once held them together. Claire pulled up to the old family house and parked. The windows were dark, the porch sagged slightly, and yet, it was unmistakably home. Her reflection stared back from the windshield, 52 years old, successful by most measures, but still carrying the same unfinished ache. For a moment she sat still, letting the engine idle. Then she turned it off, and silence wrapped around her like a long-forgotten blanket. Snowflakes gathered on the windshield, blurring her view until she could see nothing at all. It felt right somehow, to arrive in a blur. When she finally opened the car door, the cold hit her lungs sharply, clean and punishing. She whispered to herself, "Just a job, Claire. Just lights." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. This wasn't a project. This was a reckoning. The old Anderson house stood like a patient ghost, quiet but not empty. Every window seemed to watch her as she walked up the steps, boots crunching on the frozen wood. The blue porch lights were long gone, but faint stains of their color remained on the paint, like veins of memory running through the boards. Claire hesitated before knocking. The door opened before her knuckles touched it. Eli stood there, older but unmistakable, the same strong jaw, the same steady eyes that once held both kindness and fire. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy, filled with everything unsaid across 2 decades. Snow drifted in between their silence like dust in a church. "You're early," he finally said, his voice low and flat. Claire nodded, unsure if she was allowed to smile. The lines around his mouth didn't move. He stepped aside and she entered, the floor creaking under her boots as if recognizing her weight again. The air smelled faintly of pine and old paper, a scent that ached with familiarity. Inside, time had folded neatly. The furniture sat in the same places, the walls held the same faded wallpaper, and the clock above the fireplace still ticked in slow, stubborn rhythm. Only the photos were missing, all the frames stood empty, a quiet act of erasure. Claire's throat tightened. "I'll stay in the guest room," she said, but Eli didn't answer. He only nodded toward the hallway and disappeared into another room. She exhaled shakily, dropping her bags by the stairs. The silence of the house was almost holy, almost cruel. Upstairs, she opened the door to her old bedroom. The curtains were drawn, the bed neatly made, as if someone had been waiting all these years without believing she'd ever return. Claire sat down on the edge of the bed and ran her fingers along the quilt her mother had sewn. Threads frayed, colors faded, but still there. For the first time that night, tears came, quiet, unwilling, but honest. She didn't know if they were for her parents, for Eli, or for the girl she'd been before she left. Outside, the wind rose and moaned through the trees, and the house, at last, seemed to breathe again. The next morning, sunlight broke through the curtains, thin and pale. Claire woke to the sound of footsteps downstairs, steady, deliberate, unmistakably Eli's. She stayed in bed for a moment, eyes on the ceiling, listening to the creaks and pauses of the house that once carried their laughter. The air held that faint chill of places that remember too much. She rose slowly, exploring the rooms like an archaeologist of her own life. Every shelf, every corner, whispered something. A chipped mug with her name painted on it. The dent on the wall from when she and Eli had raced tricycles indoors. A strand of tinsel caught in the radiator from a long-ago Christmas. The ghosts were not haunting, they were simply waiting to be noticed. In the kitchen, Eli was making coffee. He didn't look up when she entered. "Cream's in the fridge," he said. His tone was neutral, practiced. She poured a cup, noticing the old blue canister still on the counter, their mother's sugar tin. Some things refused to move on. "I start setting up the plaza tomorrow," she said, trying to sound professional. "The town sent me a layout." He nodded without looking up. His silence wasn't cruel, just heavy, like a door that needed oiling. Still, it scraped her nerves with every second. After breakfast, she walked to the front porch. The air outside was brittle with cold. She could see her breath rise and vanish. Across the yard, the trees were dusted and white, their branches bending under the weight. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang 12 slow times. She looked up at the roofline where the blue lights once hung. For a second, she imagined them glowing again, that soft electric shimmer against the night. Her father's laughter echoed faintly in her memory, calling Eli to pass another string of bulbs. The ache returned, deep and round. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. The shadows on the wall looked like old shapes she almost recognized, the curve of Eli's smile, her mother's hands. The past wasn't gone. It was layered, like paint, and she was beginning to see the colors bleed through. The town square was a blur of motion, workers unpacking boxes of ornaments, children skating on the frozen fountain, carols floating through the speakers. Claire stood in the center, clipboard in hand, issuing quiet directions. To the townspeople, she looked composed. Inside, her nerves hummed with something closer to panic. The job was familiar. She'd done this in 100 cities before. But here, every detail carried a ghost. The oak tree where she and Eli used to hang garlands. The bench where their parents had sat drinking hot cider. Even the smell of roasted chestnuts brought back laughter she couldn't bear to remember. A woman approached, Mrs. Whitman, her old art teacher. "Claire Anderson," she said warmly. "I knew you'd come back someday." Claire smiled politely, but her throat tightened. Come back someday. As if the whole town had been waiting. As if her absence had been a pause, not an ending. When evening came, the first strings of white lights flickered on around the square. The crowd cheered softly. Claire watched, her arms crossed, eyes glistening in the glow. And then she saw Eli across the street, watching too, not smiling, not frowning, just there. She lifted her hand, half an instinct, half a wish. He hesitated, then gave a single nod before turning away. It was small, but it was something. Claire felt a fragile warmth in her chest, the first crack in the ice. Later, as she walked back to the house, the lights reflected on the snow in delicate patterns. She stopped by the fountain and closed her eyes. The hum of electricity around her sounded almost like breathing. That night, as she drifted into sleep, the faint reflection of the plaza lights reached her window, white, gold, red, but still no blue. That absence pulsed softly in her dreams, calling her towards something she wasn't ready to face. Dinner was quiet except for the clinking of forks. Eli sat across the table, his face hidden behind a newspaper. The smell of roasted chicken filled the room, but neither seemed hungry. Every word they didn't say felt louder than the ones they could. Claire tried to speak. "The plaza's almost ready," she said softly. "They'll love it." Eli nodded without looking up. "You always did good work," he said, but it wasn't praise, more like a fact he was forced to acknowledge. She wanted to tell him she missed him, that she'd thought of him every December since she left, but the words stayed locked behind her teeth. After dinner, she stood by the window, watching the faint glow of the plaza down the hill. "You ever go there?" she asked. "No," Eli said. "Not since." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The silence filled in the rest. Not since the accident, not since the fight, not since everything broke. She turned to him, but he had already left the room. The house exhaled, long, slow, weary. Claire felt the old ache spread again, that strange mixture of love and loss that only siblings could create. She whispered, "We were supposed to be on the same side." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft as breath. The first blue light of the season flickered faintly in the distance, one of her test bulbs, glowing alone among the white and gold. She smiled without meaning to. The color was gentle, familiar, forgiving. Claire stood there for a long time, her reflection merging with the snow outside. Something inside her shifted, not enough to call peace, but enough to call possibility. The silence between them was still wide, but it no longer felt impossible to cross. The air inside the old shed was heavy with dust and forgotten winters. Claire pushed open the creaking door, and the smell of rust and pine oil filled her lungs. The workshop had been her father's sanctuary, shelves lined with tangled wires, jars of nails, and faded notes in his handwriting. Everything was still, except for the faint hum of memory. She brushed a layer of dust from the workbench and found a box marked lights, blue in shaky black ink. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside lay coils of old bulbs, some cracked, some still intact. The faint metallic scent made her eyes sting with tears. It was like opening a time capsule built from electricity and grief. Behind her, footsteps crunched in the snow. Eli stood in the doorway, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. Neither spoke at first. Then he stepped closer and picked up one of the bulbs, turning it slowly between his fingers. "Dad saved these," he said quietly. "Said he'd fix them someday." His voice caught on the word someday. Claire smiled faintly, though her throat tightened. He always believed in light surviving. She wasn't sure if she meant the bulbs or them. Eli nodded but didn't look at her. For a moment, they stood side by side, two survivors of the same silence, touching fragments of what once connected them. When she left the shed, her gloves smelled of dust and copper. The sun was setting, bleeding orange light over the snow. She turned back once, watching Eli linger among the shadows of the tools. The sight was strangely tender, as if he too were searching for something buried, but not lost. That night, she took one unbroken bulb to her room. She placed it on the nightstand like a relic, small and blue against the pale lamplight. It didn't glow, but it didn't need to. It reminded her that some things still waited patiently in the dark. For the first time since she arrived, she slept without waking in the middle of the night. Outside, the cold wind pressed softly against the windows, carrying the sound of loose wires tapping the roof, like an old promise asking to be remembered. The next morning, the square buzzed with quiet curiosity. Word had spread that Claire Anderson was back, decorating the same plaza she once danced around as a child. Some greeted her warmly, others with polite distance. She felt both welcomed and judged, like a ghost attending her own memorial. Mrs. Whitman brought her coffee, smiling with the patience of someone who knows too much. "The town missed your lights," she said. Claire nodded, unsure how to answer. The compliment felt heavy, almost undeserved. She had left the town in darkness long before the bulbs went out. Children ran past her, chasing each other through the piles of garland. Their laughter was bright and unburdened, a sound that pierced her like sunlight through old glass. For a moment, she envied their unbroken hearts. Then she smiled despite herself, realizing that maybe the point of light was never to erase the dark, only to make it bearable. During lunch, a man approached her booth, Tom Myers, the town electrician. "You'll need stronger circuits for those blue bulbs," he said, adjusting his gloves. "They pull more power than you think." His tone was practical, but his eyes softened. "They were your father's favorite, weren't they?" She nodded, speechless. As the afternoon waned, she wandered near the fountain and saw a small note pinned to a post. It read, "Not every distance is measured in miles." No name, no handwriting she recognized. She folded it carefully and slipped it into her coat pocket, feeling something warm spark beneath her ribs. When she returned home, Eli was fixing the porch step. The sound of hammering echoed through the twilight. "The town looks good," he said without turning. She smiled faintly. "It will," she replied. For once, the silence that followed wasn't sharp. It just existed. That night, she read the note again before bed. The words glowed faintly in the lamplight, simple but alive. For the first time, she wondered if the lights she was hanging were not just for the town, but for herself, and for the brother who still lived in the shadows of blue. The great pine tree stood in the center of the plaza, tall and proud, its branches reaching like open arms toward the gray sky. Claire circled it slowly, studying where each string of light should go. She could hear laughter behind her, children handing her ornaments, townsfolk calling her name. The energy was contagious. She began to climb the small ladder, her gloves dusted with frost. Each bulb she clipped in place felt like stitching together fragments of a broken song. The rhythm soothed her. The smell of pine and the crunch of snow beneath the crowd wove a fragile kind of peace around her. By afternoon, the air grew colder, but her heart felt strangely warm. Eli arrived silently, carrying a wooden box of spare bulbs. He didn't say much, only handed them to her and began working on the other side of the tree. The two moved in quiet synchrony, like musicians rediscovering an old duet. At dusk, the tree stood finished, tall, radiant, a sculpture of memory and hope. Children clapped as the test lights shimmered in soft gold. Claire stepped back, snowflakes landing in her hair. Eli adjusted the top star carefully, his breath visible in the cold air. Their eyes met briefly, and for the first time, he smiled. The smallness of that smile undid her. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was human, real, alive. Claire turned away quickly, pretending to fix a wire, blinking back the tears that burned her throat. As the crowd dispersed, she lingered by the tree, running her gloved fingers along one branch. The blue bulbs waited in boxes nearby, untouched, saved for last, as her father always did. Somehow that felt right. Some lights needed the longest nights to find their glow. Walking home, she could hear the sound of bells from the church tower. Each note seemed to echo her heartbeat, steady, uncertain, but still moving forward. The night air was sharp and full of promise. The storm arrived without warning. One moment, the world was calm, the next, the sky split open with wind and snow. The house trembled as gusts howled through the trees. Power lines hissed. The windows fogged with frost, sealing them in a cocoon of white noise. Claire stood by the fireplace, watching sparks dance upward. Eli entered with a lantern, his face drawn with fatigue. "Roads are closed," he said. "We'll be here a while." His voice carried a strange calm, resignation wrapped in warmth. For once, there was no pretense of distance. They shared soup by the fire, the silence between them broken only by the crackle of wood. After a while, Eli spoke. You left the day after the funeral. Claire looked down. I couldn't stay. Everything in this house hurt. His eyes darkened. You think it didn't hurt for me? The question hung in the air like smoke. Claire felt it burn inside her. I thought you blamed me, she whispered. You said I cared more about leaving than about them. Eli stared at the flames. Maybe I did. Maybe I needed someone to blame so I wouldn't drown. His voice cracked softly. The wind howled louder outside, as if echoing everything unsaid. Claire reached for another log, her hands shaking. I never stopped missing you, she said. Every Christmas, every light I hung, I thought about this house. Eli didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, it was almost a sigh. Then maybe we both kept the same ghosts. They sat without speaking again, but something unseen had shifted, not fixed, not healed, but loosened. When the fire finally dimmed, the storm began to fade. The house fell quiet except for the faint hum of the wind, now softer, almost gentle. Claire closed her eyes, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like space being made for something new. The morning after the storm, light filtered through the windows, pale, tentative, forgiving. Claire wandered the house, still wrapped in her blanket, drawn by an old pull she couldn't explain. Her feet led her to the attic door, half buried behind boxes in time. The air up there was thin and cold. Dust swirled in the beams of sunlight like tiny galaxies. She opened a trunk labeled Christmas, old. Inside were ornaments wrapped in tissue paper, photos curled at the edges, and a small bundle of yellow envelopes tied with ribbon. Her own handwriting stared back at her, letters she had written but never sent. Hands trembling, she untied the ribbon and began to read. Each letter was a fragment of the years between apologies, confessions, scraps of longing sent to no one. Dear Eli, one read, I wish I could tell you how the lights feel empty without you. Her tears blurred the ink, but she kept reading. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. Eli appeared in the doorway, quiet, unreadable. You found them, he said softly. She nodded, unable to speak. He sat beside her on the floor and picked up a letter. His hands shook as he unfolded it. Silence filled the space between their breaths. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were wet. You tried, he said simply. All these years, you tried. The words broke something open inside her, not pain, but release. She reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. They stayed like that for a long time, the attic filled with the golden dust of morning. Outside, snow dripped from the roof in slow, steady drops. It sounded like a heartbeat. Like something thawing. And for the first time since she came home, Claire felt that maybe light wasn't something you hung or switched on. Maybe it was something you uncovered, inside the quiet, under years of dust, waiting to shine again. The attic dust still shimmered in Claire's mind as she walked to the square that afternoon. The snow had softened, melting into slush along the cobblestones, and the air smelled faintly of wet pine. Workers were finishing the last decorations, their laughter echoing across the plaza. Everything looked almost ready, almost alive. Eli joined her quietly, carrying the old box of blue bulbs. They still work, he said, showing her one that flickered faintly in his hand. The sight made her throat tighten. Let's use them, she said. All of them. He hesitated, then nodded slowly, as though agreeing to more than just light. They worked side by side, threading the fragile bulbs across the railings, the gazebo, the fountain rim. The color was deep and calm, not festive exactly, but tender. Townspeople watched from a distance, whispering, sensing something sacred unfolding in front of them. At one point, Eli laughed softly when a bulb slipped from his hand and shattered. The sound startled her, that laugh she'd forgotten, rusty but whole. She laughed too, and for a moment, the years between them simply dissolved, like frost under sunlight. When the last string was hung, they stepped back, snow crunching beneath their boots. The plaza looked like an unfinished song waiting for its final note. "Tomorrow night," she said. "We'll light them all." Eli looked at her, eyes bright with reflection. Dad would like that. On the walk home, they didn't speak, but the silence felt lighter, stretched open by small warmths. The sound of their footsteps kept a gentle rhythm, not perfect harmony yet, but the beginning of one. That night, Claire stood by her bedroom window, watching the moon spill pale light over the rooftops. She held one last bulb in her palm, glowing faintly from the test. Its color pulsed like a heartbeat, soft, steady, patient. The next morning, Maple Hollow stirred earlier than usual. Word had spread that the blue lights were returning, the first time since the accident, since the family broke, since silence fell. People arrived with thermoses and scarves, faces pink from the cold and the unspoken hope of something healing. Claire moved among them, checking connections, adjusting cables, answering questions with a smile that almost felt natural. Each task steadied her. She could feel the hum of the town beneath her fingertips, a current that seemed to flow through every wire and every heart. A small girl tugged at her coat. "Why are the lights blue?" she asked. Claire knelt, surprised by the softness in her own voice. "Because blue is the color that stays," she said. "It's what the sky keeps even after the sun leaves." The girl nodded solemnly, as if she understood. Across the plaza, Eli was helping hang garlands. Someone offered him cider, he accepted. Laughter surrounded him, cautious at first, then easy. Claire watched, her chest aching in that sweet, complicated way only healing can bring. By noon, the square glowed with anticipation, ribbons of silver, bells of gold, and the still dark blue bulbs waiting like secrets. Claire walked its perimeter slowly, tracing the outlines of her own history. Every step was both a farewell and a homecoming. She paused by the fountain, where the water beneath the ice shimmered faintly. Her reflection wavered, but behind her, she could see people smiling, gathering, building warmth out of air. For the first time, she didn't feel like a visitor here. She belonged to this brightness. When dusk began to fall, she looked toward the hill where her parents were buried. The first stars appeared above it, small and patient. She whispered a single word, almost. Snow returned at twilight, soft and slow, as if rehearsing for the moment to come. The plaza stood ready, cords buried beneath white powder, bulbs waiting like tiny promises beneath the dark. Claire sat by the fountain, her gloves in her lap, watching the light fade from the sky. Eli hadn't come down yet. He'd spent the day in the workshop, fixing something she wasn't allowed to see. She tried not to feel disappointed, but the hollow inside her pulsed with old fears, that he'd retreat again, that this piece was fragile as glass. She rose, pacing the empty square. The scent of cinnamon and smoke drifted from nearby houses. Through the shop windows she saw families gathering, hands clasped, laughter spilling like music. A warmth spread through her chest, not envy, but quiet gratitude that such moments still existed in the world. The church bells rang 8 times. Claire tilted her head toward the sound, feeling her heart sink to it. She whispered, "Tomorrow." The word floated into the cold air like a prayer. When she returned home, the living room glowed faintly. On the table lay a wooden star, polished and smooth, Eli's secret project. A note rested beneath it, for the top of the tree. "From both of us." Her eyes filled before she could stop them. Upstairs, she placed the star beside the blue bulb on her nightstand. Together they looked like two halves of the same heartbeat, one carved from wood, one made of light. She smiled through her tears, realizing that love could take either form and still shine. Outside, snow kept falling, soft and endless. The house felt alive again, the air humming faintly with the memory of voices. Claire whispered into the quiet, "Come tomorrow, I'll be ready." Christmas Eve arrived crisp and clear, the kind of night where sound travels far and every breath turns silver. The square was crowded with townspeople wrapped in scarves, their faces glowing from lanterns and expectation. Claire stood near the switchboard, heart pounding in rhythm with the hum of the wires. Eli appeared through the crowd, holding the wooden star. He met her eyes and smiled, a small, steady smile that carried 20 winters of silence melting at once. "Shall we?" he asked. She nodded, her throat too tight for words. Together, they walked to the tree. When Eli placed the star at the top, the crowd fell quiet. Claire's fingers found the switch, and for one suspended breath, everything stood still, the town, the snow, even the air itself seemed to wait. Then she flipped it. The plaza erupted in blue. Soft, endless, pure blue. It poured across rooftops and windows, shimmering over the frozen fountain, washing the town in calm and memory. Gasps rose around them. Children laughed. Someone began to cry. The light was gentle, not dazzling, like forgiveness itself. Claire turned to Eli. His eyes reflected the same glow she'd seen as a girl on their father's ladder. He whispered, "You brought them back." She shook her head. "No. We did." And in that small correction, everything between them healed. The church bells began to ring. People held hands, their faces uplifted to the blue-lit sky. Snow fell slower, as if reluctant to disturb the moment. Claire's heart ached with the strange fullness of peace. She looked up at the lights, the ones her father had loved, the ones that had waited 20 years to shine again, and whispered, "We're home." The word didn't vanish into the cold. It stayed, suspended, like a note that never stops echoing. After the crowd dispersed, the plaza quieted under the steady hum of the lights. Claire and Eli walked home together, boots crunching through untouched snow. The world seemed brighter, softer. Their shadows moved side by side, stretching long and familiar across the road. At the house, they stopped by the porch. The hooks where their father once hung the lights were still there, rusted but firm. Without speaking, they began stringing the last few blue bulbs along the roofline. One by one, they glowed against the night, a private constellation above their doorway. Inside, they cooked dinner together, clumsy but laughing. The kitchen filled with the smell of butter and rosemary, the windows fogging from warmth. It felt like childhood had returned for one quiet evening, not as a memory but as presence. When they sat down to eat, Claire looked at her brother, the lines on his face, the familiar tilt of his smile, and felt no distance left to cross. They spoke softly about their parents, about the years lost and the ones still waiting. The words didn't hurt anymore. They healed. After dinner, Eli lit a single candle on the table. "For them," he said. Claire nodded. Outside, the porch lights shimmered faintly through the frost, reflecting in the window like two souls still watching over them. Before bed, Claire stood outside for a while. The cold bit her cheeks, but she didn't mind. The blue glow from the house wrapped her in quiet peace. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was chasing light. She was living inside it. She whispered into the night, "Thank you." The wind didn't answer, but it carried her words gently through the trees, toward every window, every heart still waiting for its own blue light to turn on.